And so I want to share my favorite testimony. My favorite testimony is the testimony of transformation. Several years ago, many years ago, 4 things happened to me in less than 10 days. The first thing that happened to me was I lost this job that I had taken working for this construction company with a guy that I was madly in love with who was a lot older than me. The second thing that happened to me was that guy and I had some major disagreements that cost me 3 days in Clayton County Jail in Atlanta, Georgia. The third thing that happened to me was my daughter at the time was living back in Mississippi with my mom, and she had been in this little pageant, and I wanted to go home that weekend to visit her because she thought I was away working, and I went home to visit my daughter, and they repossessed the car I was driving. Did I mention that all of this happened in less than 10 days? The fourth thing that happened to me was backing back a little bit in my story. I grew up very bitter, very angry. I did a lot of fighting. I was the trouble kid in school. I was wilding out. And by the time I graduated from high school, though I graduated with honors, I was homecoming queen, had some good things that happened in my life too. But by the time I graduated from high school, I was bitter, I was angry. So I used to carry a gun. I used to carry a gun with 8 bullets in it at all times. Fast forwarding years after that, I was into that part of my story where these 4 things happened in less than 10 days. And so as I mentioned, the first thing that happened was I lost this job. The second thing that happened was I spent 3 days in Clayton County Jail in Atlanta. Now, I keyed the guy's car who I was dating. He had me arrested. I spent 3 days in Clayton County Jail. Third thing again was they repossessed the car I was driving when I went home to visit my daughter. The fourth thing that happened to me was because all those things had happened to me, I was devastated. The enemy started to remind me of how jacked up my life was. He started to remind me of all the things that had happened to me, like sexual abuse growing up, physical abuse, like all kinds of things that had happened in my life. The enemy himself started to remind me of those things. So he was sitting on this side, whispering in this ear. The Lord was on this side, whispering in my ear. And I sat in the middle of my apartment floor in Atlanta, Georgia, with strong intentions on using that same 25 with 8 bullets in it that I used to have to protect myself. The last face that gun looked in was mine. I basically had said that the whole world had turned against me. So I no longer wanted to be a part of it. I didn't like the life I had created for myself. So I no longer wanted to be a part of this life. I went, and when you hear people say that if somebody is suicidal, they usually give away everything, it's true. I went to my neighbors, I was giving away stuff. I went over to a friend of mine who grew up in Mississippi where I grew up, but we were both living in Atlanta in the same apartments close by each other. I went to her apartment and told her that I was about to take my life. Then I got frustrated with her because she didn't believe me. I'm sorry, y'all, I'm a little distracted okay. Yeah, so I got frustrated with her because she didn't believe me. So y'all, I walked back to that apartment and I sat in the middle of my apartment floor and I had that 25 with all those bullets in it sitting there in my hand. And basically, y'all, instead of taking my life, I cried myself to sleep. When I woke up, I still had the gun in my hand. But I was so glad that I didn't take my life. And it was in that moment when I said to God, because I grew up in church, but I still didn't know Jesus, okay? Maybe that was just me, but I grew up in church and still didn't know Jesus. And so I grew up in church and didn't know the Lord. But I said to God, God, I don't know if you're real beyond what I've been exposed to, but if you are and you can come into my heart and change my life, I would do anything to be with you. I called my mom. I moved back to Mississippi with my mom to start my life all over again. Y'all, I went and bought a Bible. And in this Bible, I started reading and learning about this God that I'd heard about, but I started to get to know this God. And when I tell you, he revolutionized my life. Like the words in the Bible that says, in the beginning, he created the earth and everything that's in it was good. All those words started to come alive for me. I started to understand the gospel. I once was blind, but now I see. I started seeing things that I had never been able to see. I started understanding things about my life. He said, Quiana, I knew you before you were formed in your mother's womb. The Lord said, Quiana, I came so that you may have life and life more abundantly. The Lord was like, reminded me that I did have a purpose. He does have things in store for me. He said, Quiana, Satan is roaming around looking for whom he may devour. But greater is he who's inside of you than him that's of the world. Y'all, and I grabbed a hold to that and I ran and I did not look back. That's been all of 20 years ago. That's been all of 20 years ago. I've been on a journey with the Lord. I've experienced the good, the bad, and the ugly, but I've experienced none of it in the last 20 years without Jesus. I have a joy that can't be taken from me. I have a beautiful family. I have a beautiful marriage, and I've been married and divorced before. But again, nothing that I've experienced in this last 20 years, I was experienced it without the Lord. So God is good, y'all. He changed my life. He saved my life. I get to live and do what I want to do every single day. I work for myself. So yeah, I do have a testimony. You do have a testimony, and there may be some of you who have experienced some of the things I shared in my story and in my testimony. Just know that God is with you. He was thinking some amazing things when he created your story. He has purpose for you. He has some things that was specifically designed because you were going to mobilize it in the world. You have something inside of you that belongs to the world. I have something inside of me that belongs to the world. And my prayer for all of us is that we allow the Lord to do what he intended to do when he created your story. I hope this blessed somebody. And that's it.